Hello, my name's Gianni, and I'm the executive producer of SIFTER. When you think about video games, they're all about stories. Whether it's recounting that time when, as a kid, you almost defeated the final wave of enemies in the arcade, or clutching victory from the jaws of defeat with your friends, or maybe it's just playing through a finely crafted narrative, making choices along the way. There are heaps of different ways to tell stories in games, and Mark Riley, design director, and Melissa Koven, narrative discipline lead at Mighty Kingdom, think a lot about those different ways to tell stories. I sat down with them a short while ago to learn about what stories made an impact on them, how they use a narrative tool designed in-house at Mighty Kingdom to help shape the actual gameplay in their games, and what rules they like to use when writing interactive fiction. Welcome, both of you, to SIFTER. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Hi, Gianni. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm really curious, right at the very outset, what is one of the most, inspiring or challenging interactive stories that you've ever played or taken part in? Something that you think about constantly, or has really framed what you do in your work?
Yeah, I guess on my end, like a personal narrative experience that I've had that I've really loved is Divinity Original Sin 2. And I felt like the way that it was crafted, obviously it was a very well-crafted game, but considering you can play the stories, you can pick a character at the start and experience the game through just one of their stories, but you still have to piece together that bigger, stranger plot that's going on. I just feel like that's it's one of my favorite games, and I think a really strong narrative game. And it has lots of drama, but it also has a lot of humor, and that's something that I feel like it just really strengthens narrative. So I guess that's one on my end that I really love.
From my perspective, the games that really inspire me these days, I love a strong, compelling narrative. I love games of the ilk of The Last of Us, which are absolutely heart-wrenching and take you for the ride of your life through an experience of ups and downs and great emotional weight and value. But the stuff that really I find compelling is games that start leaning into away from that more traditional formula and into more dynamic storytelling and creating a giant sandbox for you to tell infinite stories within. So games like RimWorld or Crusader Kings 3 that are different every single time you play them. They have a set of rules, they have a world that you reside within, but the outcome of that story is really up to you as a player and how you interact with the game. There's nothing like a game of RimWorld where you've been doing just so well and you've been fighting off bandits and you've been setting up an amazing camp and you're becoming self-sufficient, but then a horde of geese move into your region and somehow a hunting expedition goes wrong and you end up losing your entire colony to a bunch of squawking, dangerous creatures. So that's the kind of thing which really gets me now, and the kind of things that I want to lean into in the future with the kind of stories that I tell is how can we create a world to live in rather than just a traditional story to experience once or twice or something which is always going to kind of give back to the player in new and exciting ways.
Just on that, thinking of the sort of tools that you need to give players, what do you need to do to set up a world or set up a framework that gives players enough that really, as you took those examples of RimWorld, right? A lot of that's in your imagination. That's the story, the mythology that you've made up as you've kind of played through the game. What are some of the key elements that you include in interactive stories that gives players the opportunity to make their own story?
So much of that comes down to player agency and player choice. If you're giving them the ability to make choices, then you're giving them the ability to influence how that story is playing out. So a lot of games will do that through narrative choices. So presenting conversational choices that you can pick from, which will kind of influence or dictate the kind of character that you're representing in a game. RPGs do that fantastically in Mass Effect. You get to kind of craft your character through being able to make informed choices and having that agency as a player to do so. And then you can go to the nth degree by having really robust systems like something in RimWorld where you're given a random array of skills and abilities and quirks, and you get to sort of watch those play off with other characters within the game in new and interesting ways. The framework is the interesting thing there rather than the story that the game is trying to tell. So it really comes down to player choice and agency.
Yeah. And I think just adding on to that with player choice and agency, like as a narrative designer, yeah, we want like to give the players all this satisfaction to like feel like they're making choices, but there's still a way that you can like control that quite a lot to kind of stick to a main narrative and not kind of let those choices explode into like a humongous tree of things you cannot really wrangle later on. So yeah, I think it's just like getting that balance between giving them some agency and yeah, keeping it, I guess, within scope and within the ability for QA to test and yeah, all of those things that maybe a narrative designer has to think about just outside of writing. So,
are you able to give us an example of one you've used in the past or one you think worked really well just to that point, Melissa?
One that I really like and have used mostly in a lot of personal projects, a bit of tinkering with some ideas at work, is Ink by Untitled Studios. And that has a lot of really powerful capabilities built into it. And you don't really, like it has like some, you have to learn the syntax and stuff. It's not like you need to know how to program or anything like that. But yeah, it has a lot of great support as well for like getting your programming team to hook that up into a game. And I really like that one, but I'd like to experiment with some more in the future as well.
We're very lucky that we have some really powerful in-house tools at Mighty Kingdom. We have a proprietary narrative engine that we've built, which is very highly tailored for our designers to be able to make really, really powerful cutscenes. But for people out there who are interested in just having access to some great tools to be able to tell really compelling stories, there are great tools that are out there, often for free on the marketplace. So something like Twine is a great text editor where basically it allows you to make your own sort of choose your adventure style games. And if you're a little bit more tech savvy and you're able to get into a game engine like Unity, which is freely available for people to play around with and experiment with, there's an asset called Fungus, which is just great. It allows you to create. It doesn't sound very nice as a name, but it's a really powerful tool that allows you to create kind of those traditional RPG style conversation trees and be able to sort of test them really rapidly and get your stories out there into the public space for feedback, which really is one of the most important things when you're developing as a writer or a narrative designer.
Can you tell me a bit more about that narrative engine that you have in-house? Because I know that is something you're pretty proud of and how that kind of shapes how you tell stories.
Yeah, I mean, at a high level, it's a tool set. So, I mean, it kind of looks similar to a video sequencer or editor. So we have a few cinematic designers in-house who have a background in film and they have a background in using more traditional editors. And it is a very familiar experience for them to get their hands dirty with. But essentially, it's a really highly tailored tool to allow our design team to be able to create really high-quality cutscenes in our games. It kind of allows our designers to sort of run the full gamut of the creative process. They can be writers, directors, and editors all within a singular tool set. And it is, since it was built kind of side by side with our programming team and our design team, it means that it's full of quality of life improvements, just ways to really rapidly achieve significant amounts of work in a much short amount of time. And it's tailored specifically for designers, so it kind of speaks their language and works within their skill set. So it is something we're really proud of and something that we're continuing to try to develop and spread to more of our games, because another key part of it is it was built to be modular. It was built to kind of be plug and play, something that can attach not just to games like Ava's Manor, which is a mobile solitaire decorative narrative game, but to be able to attach to a third-person RPG or a first-person shooter or really anything in between and still function in a way which is accessible to our designers.
Yeah. And just to like go into a bit more detail on what the tool can actually do. So yeah, it allows designers to control things like character movement, triggering certain animations, camera movement, so like zooms and pans, particles, dialogue. And yeah, there's like a lot of really great functionality just in the core engine. And on top of that, the team is continuously coming up with cool like quality of life fixes or new functionality that we can add onto the engine. So it's like evolving over time, which is really rewarding for the team to see. And as Mark touched on briefly, we have cinematics designers, but our narrative designers are also like intimately familiar with the narrative engine. So it means when they're crafting stories and stuff, they're making sure that they have, like, they understand the capability of the narrative engine. And it's just, it makes us work really, really well together, I think.
Is it a good way to think about it a bit like direction notes in a script, for example, blocking and all of that sort of stuff? You're sort of framing it up like you would perhaps a play, and then then the lighting technicians come in, and then the set designers come in and kind of put all the stuff around it.
Yeah, definitely. Like in like our scripts, like where we might write dialogue or bubbles, like conversational kind of exchanges between characters. We would also include direction that might have things like the emotion we're trying to convey, or like it actually depends on the narrative designer. Some are like, they can imagine the vision of how they want the scene to play out, like exactly. And then some might just put fewer notes in there and leave it up to the cinematics team to like, they're really creative and great at bringing stuff to life. So they might leave it a bit more open for them to decide which animations to do, where to make people move around. But the idea is that the scenes should just feel really dynamic, and like we don't want to have too much conversation without a lot of like fun visual stuff happening. So yeah, we work together on that.
Mighty Kingdom has a history of making games primarily for mobile, but you're starting to release games on other platforms now. You just brought one out at the time we recorded it this week that has just come out. Can you tell me a little bit about the differences between writing a narrative for a player that would be picking up a phone every now and then versus someone who's sitting in front of a console and maybe playing for a longer period of time?
Yeah. And I think just on mobile content, if the content is rolled out in chunks over a period of time, so we're doing these like cyclical deliveries being rolled out to players over time, like we really care about each of those chunks feeling like they're adding value for the player. So we might try to work in like mini arcs on those little chunks that are going to be released to players. Like we try to make sure that the story and what's happening in those chunks is going to feel very rewarding. So it's just an extra, it's a bit of an extra headache sometimes to structure it that way, but it's worth it in the end.
And you mentioned the the recent console release that has come out with Conan and Chop at the beginning of this week. That's our big first foray into console games. It's not going to be the last. So we're learning so much. We're really evolving as a studio from gameplay that's been more predominantly in the mobile space and for particular kinds of audiences, and that's really growing and expanding in new and exciting ways. We announced recently as well that we've acquired the IP for a homegrown Australian bush horror movie called Carnifex, which is something so completely different for Mighty Kingdom that I'm sure it's raised some eyebrows. So we're telling completely new stories in completely new ways. So we're really on a very interesting journey in Mighty Kingdom at the moment.
I was going to ask about that. It's really curious because a lot of the work you have done, I mean, not everything, but you have done a lot of license work where you're working in someone else's space. They own the ideas. Peter Rabbit, for example. You've got a Star Trek game that you're about to be making. Carnifex was the one I was going to bring up as well. And I'm curious, when you're designing in that space from a narrative perspective, what sort of things do you need to respect when you're working with other people's ideas?
The respect is key, and the reason why we, I think, continue to have success in licensed products is because of the way that we approach that product with respect. What we strive for more than anything is authenticity when we're working with a licensed product. And that's the name of the game. It's really understanding the IP, and it's representing that in often a new way, in a way which is truly representative of that product. And that can be a difficult thing to achieve, especially when you're converting something from a movie IP into a game. It can lose some of its luster, if it feels like it's too prescribed or too repetitive. And what we're finding with audiences, and especially young audiences, is that they're very sophisticated. When they look at games, they're not just looking at the game; they're looking at the brand. They're looking at it as a collective experience. They are expecting, as a player, for the game to be just as good as the movie, to look as good, to feel as good, to be just an extension of that experience. So again, it's about respect. It's about respecting the IP, and it's about respecting the players. And the best way to do that is to achieve that key core tenet of authenticity.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's just really about respecting their brand and understanding kind of like their brand guidelines, I guess, but also seeing how, as like a narrative team, you can kind of deepen those characters even more, but still stick to like who they are. But yeah, a lot of them we can probably flesh out a lot more. So.
Have you got a good example of where you've taken one of these licensed titles and pushed in a direction for a narrative that you maybe were not super confident they were happy to do? I mean, Conan, for example, seems like one where that is very different to what I have ever experienced with Conan the Barbarian. And have you got other examples like that where you've kind of taken and made your own?
Ooh, it's a great question. Conan was going to be my number one example of that, because you're right. Like, chibi style Conan the Barbarian was the last thing that anyone expected. In fact, when it was announced, it was thought to have been an April Fool's joke. I mean, it didn't help that it was on April Fool's that the announcement was made. But that, I think, inherently was a risk, right? You're taking something which is a very serious, very brooding, often over the top violent IP, and putting that very Mighty Kingdom spin on it, which is taking it and making it accessible and fun and colorful and juicy and a lot of the things that Conan has just never been. But for that specifically, it was about striking the right tone. We knew that we were doing something which was unexpected with Conan, and really the magic, the secret sauce of that was to lean in. It was to lean in really heavily, and to embrace the fact that it was new and it was surprising and it was coming out of the blue. So I love that. I mean, I love the ability to take something and subvert it and create a really compelling and exciting experience out of that. I don't think we've had as many opportunities as we have with Conan to subvert something in quite a significant way. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that, Melissa? I'm struggling to think if we've done something quite as extreme before.
Probably not. I think like it's not quite the same, but on Ava's Manor, that's an original IP. We work with Yukon on that game. And I don't think I think we've always kind of been on the same page about who these characters are and the story that we should be telling. But there are times where we might put forward an idea that is a bit more out of the box than our usual chapter content. I probably can't give like the explicit example right now because that one's not quite rolled out yet. But let's say we usually do a certain kind of, so the premise of the game is you go around this manor and you decorate all these rooms. And there's also all this like mystery and romance that happens on the side. But the core part is not the core part. The decoration part is like renovating all of these rooms. And they kind of have a usual like manor room type vibe. But we've had some unconventional locations that we've kind of put forward and proposed for future story content. And we've had to kind of convince that that's like a good thing to do. And it was, I think like really well received. And I think players will love it, even though it's a bit different to what they've been doing for the past X number of chapters. But that's not really like working off of someone else's IP.
So we may not see chibi Carnifex in the future. You're saying potentially might stick a bit closer to the source material for that one?
I wish I could tell you so much more about that project, but but I won't be able to. But I mean, it is one thing that has been revealed around that. I think Gina, the producer at Dancing Rose, mentioned that the game is kind of not necessarily retelling the story of the movie, but broadening that and expanding on that. And that's one of the really exciting things about that project is that we can think about, what else can we do to add value to that IP without compromising the IP itself? I mean, because what's so important is the fact that that movie is going to be released and it needs to stand alone. It needs to be received on its own, standing on its own feet. And the game can't, undercut that or underserve that in any way. So it has to be a complementary experience and it can't just retread the same ground. So that's one of the really key messages that we're taking into that development. And one of the things that we're really excited to explore is what else can we bring to the table, which won't necessarily be covered in the movie, but is only going to enhance that experience.
One thing I'm curious about, because we're seeing a bit of it's obviously been going on for a really, really long time, but we've now started to see a number of interactive stories being adapted for legacy media. Most recent one that's come out is Uncharted, right? That came out, as just released in cinemas, still available for people to watch at the time of recording this. And I'm curious about, if you're going the opposite direction, how would you like to see interactive stories adapted or their worlds adapted for other media sources?
I think like in most cases, a game experience is like much longer than like a movie, unless it's like going to be a TV show, then you can probably squeeze in a lot of details. But I guess like the first worry would be like, is all of the amazing world building and character detail and like plot points, is this all going to fit into like a movie experience? And so I think like as a studio, you'd want to be like working really closely with those filmmakers or whoever is producing this movie or show, just to make sure that those core like foundations and story threads and stuff are still in there, and the ones that have to be sacrificed or changed are done in like a really respectful way to the original source, which was a game, which is so cool.
What games do or what I find really special about games, and especially storytelling in games, is the ability to serve so many different types of audiences and players in a way that other media can't really replicate. And that's because the player is an active participant in the experience. If you're reading a book or if you're watching a movie, you are essentially the observer. But with games, you are a part of that story. You're a part of the way that story unfolds. Often you will have agency of choice in being able to impact the story, even if it is just, do I go this way or this way? Do I do these puzzles in this order or this order? You are influencing and affecting that choice. No matter what, to be able to sort of take a game and present it into another medium, you're going to be distilling it in some capacity. Because the scope of what you're able to do as a storyteller in games is so large. Like if you think about something like Skyrim, where you have your quests and your overarching story and your side quests and the characters that you're meeting and developing, and even the books that you're finding along the way that are so meta that there are books within the game that tell their own unique stories. There are some players out there who absolutely love that additional bit of lore and being able to delve that much deeper into the story, but not every player needs to read those books, and certainly not every player does. They have that freedom of choice about how much they're going to engage with the story, how much of that lore they're going to digest. You can go so big and you can serve so many different types of players and what they want. So no matter what, to be able to take that experience anywhere else, you do need to figure out how you're going to distill it down and what the really core part of it is that is going to be best represented. And the key way to be able to do that is through collaboration. So I think if it ever was going to be the case with something that we were working on was going to take that next step and broaden out and become more than just a game, but turn into IP or a broader brand, being part of those discussions and being core in the collaboration process of how that's going to be represented would be essential, I think.
Yeah. And I think it's super important because things like movies, those are entry points for like getting people into the world of games. Like if you think about The Witcher, like the show on Netflix, that probably attracted a hell of a lot of like new players and people who had never even picked up like The Witcher 3 before. So I just think it's a really good opportunity to like, even if it isn't quite the game experience, just to attract those people and introduce them to a new world.
And just finally, I'm curious, is there a moment or a particular example you can think of that you're really proud of, either because you saw the numbers on how players were interacting with it, or just told a story that you really felt, close to your heart? Can you tell me a little bit about some of that? Is it a good example for you?
Oh, that is a good one. I mean, there have been a few occasions in my career where I've had that moment. This experience was representative of that idea that I jotted down in the middle of the night when I woke up, and I'm like, that's it, that's the thing. And to see that on someone's face and to kind of be able to know that it hit the mark is so special. Like I've been lucky enough to, I grew up a huge Star Wars fan and sci-fi fan. I was really lucky enough to be able to work on some Star Wars games early in my career and to kind of go from that position of being a fan to being an active creator in that space. There was a Clone Wars game that we worked on where I managed to write some throwaway jokes that happened to land in the final game, and they worked really well, and they jived with the main writer's view of how that world was going to take place. And that was a really special moment early in my career. More recently, Ava's Manor is something which I think Melissa's probably going to speak to in more detail, but it's something that was really near and dear to our hearts because it was one of our first forays into our own IP and creating these characters and creating these worlds. The dog Marlowe in Ava's Manor is actually very heavily based on my dog Malloy, in personality, not looks, but just in terms of that complete bumbling, lovable goofball. to have that character out there in the world being beloved by so many. Like, if I ever need to just feel good for a moment, I'll just jump onto the Ava's Manor Facebook page and just look at the absolute love that is being poured onto Marlo, and to know that came from somewhere special, that came from somewhere really close to home. I'm a complete sap when it comes to my dogs, so to, to be able to use them as influence and to be able to get them out there in some kind of representation in our games was so incredibly special to me. So it's things like that that really make it worthwhile, just knowing that you've put something of yourself out there and it's been so well received.
Yeah. Mark was definitely involved with Ava's a bit before me, but for me, Ava's has been like a really big, rewarding experience as well, just to like see the characters grow and change. And even the ones that people hate initially, they start to love. And yeah, I don't want to like spoil too much, but it's just you can like see the transformation in the characters and in their relationships. And yeah, as Mark said, the Facebook is a great source of, I guess, it gives inspiration, I guess, and it gives an idea of what people are wanting to happen. And we have a couple things in the pipeline for Ava's that will really satisfy a lot of their desires. So that's all I can really say. But yes.
Ooh, great spoiler.
It's been a real pleasure speaking to you both. Thank you for taking this broad look at narrative and telling me a little bit more about what you do at Mighty Kingdom. Very excited to see. There's every time I talk to someone at Mighty Kingdom, there's like 10 billion projects going on all at once. I think that's a pretty fair assessment. So it's obviously going to be a pretty exciting couple of years into the future. So thank you so much, and we'd love to have you back on in the future.
Thanks so much, Gianni. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Gianni. That was great.
That's Mark Riley and Melissa Koven from the narrative team at Adelaide's Mighty Kingdom. SIFTER is produced by Nicholas Kennedy, Kyle Pauletto, Fiona Bartholomaeus, Daniel Ang and Adam Christou. Mitch Lowe is our senior producer, and my name is Gianni Giovanni, and I'm the executive producer. Thanks to Omny Studio for their support of SIFTER. Now, if you'd like this story, why not check out the back catalogues of our podcast, Lightmap. We've got more than 200 interviews with creatives in interactive media, and each of their stories are fascinating. We've got big high-profile developers, but also small indies, each of them taking their path to making something that you can play and enjoy. You can find them on our website, which is sifter.com.au, or search for Lightmap in your podcast player, wherever you like to listen. So that address again is sifter.com.au, or search for Lightmap by SIFTER in your podcast player. Until next time, have fun.